Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Mother-in-law steals my Tesla, claims she's the real owner. TLDR. In summary, my partner and I went on a spring break vacation and left out pet cat home alone for a few days. Our car was broken into on the last day of the trip and our valuables were stolen, so we had to stay longer to try and get them back, during which my mother-in-law called repeatedly and harassed us about leaving the cat on its own, with no sympathy to our situation. Eventually she took matters into her own hands by letting herself into our house and stealing the pet despite multiple warnings by me to involve the cops. I called the cops later and she was arrested. While in lockup we requested counseling for her who uncovered undiagnosed mental illness and recommended treatment. We got her checked into a mental institution and I've got my cat back. Win. Freaking win. Hi. My name is Sarah and I've got a mother-in-law from hell. My partner and I spent months planning a vacation during spring break, which we both sorely needed to be away from our jobs for a little while. Even though we both have high-paying jobs, it means we get little rest or time to ourselves and are always exhausted. It will be nice not to worry about that stuff for a little while. There is also the issue of an overbearing parent, with my mother-in-law ringing us constantly because she needs something and flies off the handle if we do not follow orders, like the last thing we want to do when we finish work or her chores as well, so I guess this is also a little time to get away from her. We planned to fly so we could relax on the trip. That meant leaving my prized Tesla at home, which I struggled with internally before we left, as well as the way there. After a great week we got ready to fly home, but on the last day our hotel room was broken into. Everything was either broken or stolen. Luckily we still had our phones on us, but our bags, our keys, all gone. My partner called his parents to explain the situation and was surprisingly met with little sympathy. We had to get friends to wire us some money so we could stay at the hotel while the police looked for our stuff. The next morning while we waited we get another phone call from the mother-in-law. She says her car has broken down and wants us to come over and pick her up. We stood silent for a moment, baffled by what she said. We weren't sure if she forgot our situation or just didn't care. She repeated herself more sternly, like it was an order than a request, and we had to patiently explain we couldn't do that. She hung up. An hour passes and she calls back, asking us again to pick her up, but my partner, doing the best he can, says he'll call a friend or a mechanic to come out and help. She hung up. He sighed. I could tell he loved her, but even this stress was too much for him, with all piling on at once. At the end our holiday was turned into an utter nightmare. We didn't hear back from her until the next day to complain about something else. No thanks or hint of gratitude in her voice at all. Her car was going to be in the shop for a while as they need to order some new parts into the local garage, but she still needed to get around occasionally. She didn't work anymore but liked to go shopping in coffee shops. A pause followed as she waited for us to help, but instead I asked if she had thought of using the bus. She was very expletive in our reasoning as to why she would not be doing that and what I could do with my opinions. My partner tried to stand up for me, seeing as we still had issues of our own and were hundreds of miles away. We were in no position to help her even if we wanted to, and we didn't want to. A light bulb seemed to click in her head when she realized we had to leave my Tesla at home. As soon as she brought it up my face dropped, expression shifting into nervous horror as she danced around the question. She asked if she could borrow it for a little while, but there was no way I was going to agree to that. With my partner's support we were able to explain that she couldn't, and for once she seemed to understand. The phone call ended after that, but we felt like we dodged a bullet. We received a call from the local law enforcement later that afternoon to say they recovered our belongings and could come down to the station to pick them up. Despite all the added hassle, it looked like we would finally be able to return home soon. His phone needed to charge, so he stayed to organize the flights while I went downtown to get our things. I get a call 2 hours later from the devil herself looking for my partner, angry at the idea that she might be getting ignored even after I tell her the phone was off. She nonchalantly shrugs it off as our fault anyway, and in a casual tone says she needed to borrow my Tesla to run some errands. My Tesla. When I confronted her about it, she became defensive and argumentative, as if we hadn't already asked her not to use it. The conversation ended in a tirade of insults and warnings that left me red and furious as I stormed back to the hotel. She had let herself into our home with the spare keys we gave in case of emergency, then after rooting through the kitchen for the car keys helped her to the Tesla and left. She saw no problem with that. In fact, she claims she owns the Tesla because of the money she helped us put down on our first house, and that I should be grateful enough to let her use it, trying to twist me into the bad guy here. I told her to leave it at my house as she wasn't allowed to use it, but she flat out refused, knowing that there was nothing I can do about it right now. I bet she was even smirking too. Catching the next and earliest morning flights, we could hurried back and arrived home to a house with a very empty driveway. The bitch still had my Tesla. Despite my partner desperately trying to mediate and calm us both down, I ended up calling the cops, and after resisting arrest she was taken to a padded call following a much-needed psych evaluation. His side of the family have since disowned me, glaring daggers into my back at each social gathering while trying to argue that I was wrong to get her arrested, that she was sick, she didn't know what she was doing, she needed help, and yes, she did need help. And now she can have it and stay there. The next story is titled, Ken and Karen Need the Whole Parking Lot. This happened a few years ago. I only just remembered it and realized it was a genuine Karen encounter. My mom and I stopped by the post office on the way home. At the time we were in a Mini Cooper. There was only one other car in the whole parking lot, up in front of the building. There were 2 available spots to the right of it, directly in front of the entrance, and several to the left. Mom pulled into the open spot furthest to the right, leaving an empty spot between hers and the other vehicle. Mom gets out of the car and grabs the mail. It took 2 minutes at most. Walking back out, an older man, 70s, had rolled down his window in the other vehicle and began accosting my mom for parking right next to him. "Oh, there's an entire parking spot between us?" replies my mom. Now these aren't compact parking spots, these are extra wide because this is a rural town and pickups, work trucks, and vans are more of the norm, so you could have fit nearly a whole Mini Cooper and a half between the 2 vehicles. The man continues to complain that we parked too close. How's my wife supposed to get into the car? And he starts condescendingly instructing my mother to get into her car and park somewhere else, and even how to park, and on about why it wasn't okay to park so close to his vehicle and that his wife couldn't get into the car with how close we were parked, and that no one is allowed to park in the first parking spots but them. At this point I'm wondering if his wife is disabled and using a motorized scooter, though there was beyond enough room to accommodate her if that was the case. There was also a handicapped parking spot further down near the ramp for the walkway, so it wouldn't explain why they parked there anyway. None of this made sense. My mom started arguing back that she was parked nowhere near his vehicle as the man's non-handicapped wife, also in her 70s, walks out, sees our Mini, and starts complaining about how we're parked too close to her car. At this point, in a rare moment of rational thinking on her own part, my mom comes to the same conclusion I did, that this isn't worth our time and this was going nowhere. So she just gets in the car as both old kooks continue to rant at us and we just leave. The next story is entitled Old Man at the Grocery Store Blows Up on Me and My Dad and Threatens to Fight Us. This crazy encounter happened the day after Christmas. Me and my dad went to the grocery store to get some food for a trip to our family cabin in the woods. There was barely anybody shopping in the store, as it was late in the evening, so we were able to get our shopping done quickly. There were a few more things on our list that we needed to get, including hot dogs. At this grocery store, the hot dogs are on the far end of the store right next to the condiments. As my dad and I headed our way over to that aisle, we saw an elderly man making his way towards that same aisle, muttering to himself about something. As my dad and I turned the corner, we saw the hot dogs right behind where the man was standing with his cart, so my dad went to park our cart behind him and look at what kind of hot dogs were available. All of a sudden, the old man abruptly turned his cart while shouting, "Hey, why don't you get off my ass?" Yup, you guessed it. This guy here is the entitled old man of our story. He looked to be in his late 70s, early 80s, wore an olive green hat and a black jacket, and had a cane in his cart. My dad, caught off guard by his sudden reaction, asked, "Who are you talking to?" The old man turned to him and said, You son of a witch. I'm over here shopping all by myself, and you just had to get on my duckin' ass." I, equally as surprised as my dad, chimed in and asked, "We're just here to get hot dogs. What's your problem?" Mind you, my dad didn't ram our cart into this guy or stopped really close behind him in his personal space. He just only parked about 3 or 4 feet behind this old man. Yet somehow, this caused him to blow a complete gasket. The old man continued to ramble on, shouting profanities and calling us names in the process. I was just standing there in disbelief. What was wrong with this guy? We literally did nothing to him, and yet here he was yelling at me and my dad like he saw us kick a dog. My dad, starting to get impatient with this man, told him to watch his mouth and just leave us alone. My dad sometimes has a short fuse and could lose his patience pretty easily, and he definitely would have said a lot more to this guy. However, he restrained himself and didn't escalate the argument any further. The old man then just turned his cart around and started to walk away, saying, yeah, Merry Duckin' Christmas and a Happy Duckin' New Year, which? Why don't you meet me outside? Yeah. This 70-something-year-old man actually wanted to fight me and my dad outside the store, all because we parked too close behind him with our cart and got on his ass, apparently. My dad and I weren't even the slightest bit fazed by this threat. The guy was walking with a very bad limp too, so we sure as hell aren't going to follow him outside the store to throw hands and risk being arrested, especially for attacking someone who is handicapped. The old man continued rambling and cursing at us as he walked out of the aisle, but my dad and I just said, whatever, old man, and went back to looking at the hot dogs. We eventually picked some out and left the aisle soon after, but not before sharing the story of our confrontation with the crazy old man to a young employee at the nearby meat department. All of us had a good laugh about it. We soon saw the old man again in the self-checkout lane, chatting with a cashier as we were paying for our groceries. As we were leaving, he saw us and started muttering and grumbling at us yet again. My dad and I just shook our heads at him and walked out the door. Whatever, dude. As we got home, my dad and I couldn't stop thinking about what just happened and wondered what the heck was even wrong with that old man who blew up on us. We told my mom about our encounter, and she laughed along with us about the whole thing. This is definitely a story that both me and my dad will be talking and joking about for a long time. Hopefully this will be the only time we encounter that crazy old man at that grocery store. The last story is titled, "But I'm an employee. I don't have time to wait." So, this happened 13 years ago when I had a part-time job working as an operations agent for a regional carrier that was owned by one of the major US carriers. I won't say which, since there are a few other stories I will eventually share and I don't want to dox myself in the process. I took this job after being denied a full-time position at the other airport company I was working for. The work was interesting. Basically we would set up the day's plans for our station's flights, coordinate baggage and catering, and collect the data needed to perform weight and balance of our planes. This helps the flight crew trim the aircraft for the safest and most efficient flight characteristics. No BS, there were times when I would radio out to a plane to ask them to burn more fuel while taxiing. Something like 500 pounds was allocated for this, to bring the aircraft under its maximum takeoff weight, MTOW, or ask the crew to move someone from the back of the plane to the front to bring the plane into balance. Such is the life in ops. The discount on tickets was nice though. So, on to the story. While I was undergoing my training for the job, my shift started at 4 a.m. If you've ever worked the early shift at an airport, you know this means waking up around 2 to 2:30 a.m., driving into employee parking, and taking the crew bus to the airport, hoping that there are no obstacles along the way, like a railroad crossing with slow-moving freight trains. Bottom line, the airport runs on coffee, and lots of it. I got to work that day and, getting there slightly early, decided I would get a coffee. The line at Dunkin' was long, and there were only 2 people working. I got in line behind a pilot, who was behind a flight attendant, who was behind another employee. Basically there were only employees in the line. The line is moving, but slowly. I'm debating whether to go sneak a coffee from the break room urn, used to restock the flights. Our regional jets didn't have coffee makers, since the flights were so short, when I see a wheelchair attendant standing at the order pickup. A quick word on wheelchair attendants. While some airlines still have their own special services staff that handle passengers needing assistance, think wheelchair needs, unaccompanied minors, translators, etc. Most airlines have this service contracted out to save money. The dominant contractor at this airport also handled things like passenger ID checks, aircraft door security, and skycap services. With the exception of the ID checkers and other security roles, many of these contractors could accept tips, and thus would try to maximize the number of passengers they assisted in an attempt to get more tips. As a result, they were always racing to finish one job before the next, and were often very rude to airline staff, since they were subject to things like delays in boarding or disembarking, as this cut into their tip opportunities. At another airline we had one of these attendants kick a passenger waiting for our flight out of the wheelchair so they could go work a different flight. The contractor never returned, and the passenger spoke no English, so we were combing the concourse looking for them when they didn't board. Anyway, the stage is now set. I didn't recall seeing the attendant in line, and they wear distinctive red vests so they can be spotted easier, so at least someone in the line would have seen them had they been there. But, as it turned out, they hadn't been there. The attendant started waving to the cashier assisting another customer. "Attendant, a small coffee?" The cashier either ignored them or didn't hear them, because they continued assisting the customer. The attendant didn't like this. Louder than before, "Small coffee?" At this point the attendant started to get annoyed looks from the people in line. The Dunkin' staff continued to ignore her. Even louder, "Hey! Small coffee." At this point the pilot in line ahead of me spoke up. Pilot P. "Hey, the line starts back there," pointing to the end of the line. A. Holds up their security pass, "But I'm an employee. I don't have time to wait." P. Points to his pass, "I'm an employee too. And so are they." He gestures to the other people in line. A. Ignores him and returns their attention to the Dunkin' staff. "Hey, small coffee. I have a flight coming in soon." The Dunkin' staff finally address her. Worker W. "Ma'am, you need to wait in line like everyone else has." But I'm an employee and I'm in a hurry." W. "So is nearly everyone else in this line. Go to the back of the line." The attendant harumphs loudly and stalks off toward the security checkpoint to go meet her arriving flight, without her coffee. Funnily enough, if she had her coffee, she wouldn't have been able to carry it through the security checkpoint. Given the liquid laws, this was barely 3 years after those went into effect, and the fact that these contractors didn't all have access to the restricted areas apart from the passenger areas, and thus couldn't bypass the checkpoint. As for me, I got my coffee. XL hot, cream only, and a croissant. Bad idea in a paper bag. I quit that job a few months later when another airline gave me a full-time position with slightly better pay. Fun fact, at some airlines, the people tasked with safety are paid less than the baggage handlers. Having been a baggage handler also, I can attest to this. Thank you for listening.